In a world where the line between the living and the dead is often blurred, few have walked that boundary more fearlessly than Ed and Lorraine Warren, undoubtedly the world's most famous paranormal investigators. But their legacy didn't end with them. In this episode, we chat with Chris McKinnell, grandson of Ed and Lorraine, a man who grew up not with fairy tales but with real-life ghost stories, haunted houses and objects. As a child, he watched the veil pulled back. As an adult, he chose to step through it. For over 4 decades and over 10,000 cases, Chris has investigated the darkest corners of the supernatural, from cursed objects and malevolent spirits to ancient rituals and modern-day hauntings. As the founder of the Warren Legacy Foundation for Paranormal Research, Chris is dedicated to providing the best possible help to those in need across the globe, free of charge. This is more than a story about ghosts. It's a journey into the unknown with a man whose bloodline is steeped in the paranormal and whose purpose is to uncover what lies beyond.
So really, if you can just share with us about the Warren Legacy Foundation, what you're doing and what you hope to achieve with it.
Certainly, of course. The Warren Legacy Foundation is something that I started with my grandmother right after the first Conjuring movie came out. So what was that, 2012, 2013? And we were getting hammered with requests for help from all over the world. Now, my grandfather had started an organization called the New England Society for Psychic Research. But it seemed obvious to me that most of the world doesn't know New England and doesn't connect that with Ed and Lorraine Warren. I wanted to make their names continue and keep that alive. It was originally supposed to be under Nesper. It didn't turn out that way, unfortunately, but that's how it was supposed to start. My grandmother loved the idea. She loved the idea of expanding our mission globally. I had been in the Peace Corps. I had worked with volunteers in several other organizations, and I had the experience. She wanted me to take it and move forward with it. So that's how we got started. We are a global organization. We are made up of volunteers who generously give their time for free. We help people without charge and completely confidentially. Now, you may hear me talk of people by name, but those are people who've already come forward in the public. We would not do that otherwise. I treat this more as a doctor-patient relationship where we protect you in every way we can. If you're the one that wants to put yourself out there publicly, then I feel, okay, I can use that to help warn other people and inform other people so that we're able to maybe stop cases from happening.
Yeah, that's great. Just from that, obviously taking that globally, what was the real sort of inspiration around that? I know it takes it outside of New England, outside of America, but what was the real draw about trying to take that globally?
Well, I've lived all over the world. I've lived everywhere from Africa and the Middle East to throughout Europe, South America, and Asia. And I felt that it was important that everybody has access to good, ethical help. People who are not peddling fear, people who are coming to you from a place of, if not, certainly not expertise. I don't believe anybody is an expert in the paranormal world, but at least better informed and more comfortable with accepting the unknown. I think most people are terrified when they're faced with something they can't understand, and they will label it, even as the devil, before they're willing to accept it as what they don't understand. Because if it's the devil, then they have a handle on it.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the devil. And I'm perfectly comfortable with saying I don't know what something is if I don't. But almost all the time, it isn't something dangerous. It's somebody trying to get your attention, even when something flies across the room. Or it's perhaps somebody in your home who is very, very emotionally upset and they are somehow harnessing some power, and things are subconsciously flying around because of them. And we can work with that. We can help them with that. It's a totally different experience than what Hollywood would have you believe.
Yeah, absolutely with that. I mean, it's an interesting concept there that obviously you don't believe in the devil. A lot of people will put that down to the devil exists and the devil does what it is. But has there been a case that you've been involved with that where you haven't been able to help people?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. The truth is, we are our own worst enemies. And if someone is not willing to take care of the underlying issues that make them vulnerable, there's very little we can do. There are no magic wands. This is can be a spiritual battle where we walk beside you. We're there to help, but you have to be willing to also work with us. Having said that, if I'm dealing with a human spirit, then I'm also dealing with somebody with free will, just like you and I have.
Yeah.
If they don't want to leave, and if they happen to be a real miserable human being or disturbed human being, we may not be able to help. We may not be able to calm that spirit down and help them to pass over. So there are a number of ways that we're not able to help. Somebody maybe has a mental illness and they're not willing to get help with that, or they've, for instance, got MS, multiple sclerosis. I'm thinking of a particular case where they were so fixated on this being something spiritual, and they kept sending me videos that showed absolutely nothing, but they kept getting these thumpings in their back, and they just would not get it checked out. They'd been diagnosed with MS, and they would not get the medical help they needed. What can I do to help somebody like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not medical. You can offer advice and support so far, but you're right, if people aren't willing to help themselves in a lot of cases, then it's very, very difficult to do that. Just in relation to the foundation, I know you mentioned it's global now, and if someone was wanting to reach out to the foundation for support, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure, you can go to the Warren Legacy WarrenLegacyFoundation.com. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, and I will do my best to answer every single person that reaches out to me. Now, if you send me a message that says hi, I'm probably not going to answer it. But if you're coming to me looking for help, and if you have an actual profile that looks real, then yes, of course, I'll help you. Unfortunately, I have to worry about hackers just like anybody else in the world.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll do for that is we'll put all the links into that as well, so that people will be able to access them from there. But I think it's good to get the message out that there is help out there for people. Just in relation to that, there's lots of paranormal investigators, lots of experts, and I know you said similar to me. I don't necessarily think you get an expert, because how do you know everything about a particular subject? But there's lots of organizations, groups out there that offer help, some better than others. But what sets the legacy, the foundation, apart from everybody else?
We work with every religion. We work with people from all walks of life. We don't prejudge. I don't care if you're paranoid schizophrenic. That doesn't mean you don't have paranormal phenomena happening around you. That's one of the things I've learned. We want to know everything because it's the complete picture that helps us to help you. I think our code of ethics is very strong. It's a stated code of ethics, and that's important. We are not charging, and everybody is confidential. A lot of these people online are interested in clicks and likes. They want to get their 15 minutes of fame. Personally, I think that if you're going in there with a big ego, you're pushing God out of the picture, and you're not going to be effective. So that's another way that I think we differ. Our people are doing this for the right reasons.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that I get involved with from there sometimes is where groups have been in, promised all sorts of things, and have actually made it worse in some cases with that. And I guess there's an element of that for yourselves, that somebody has been in, tried to do something, or quite often they've dabbled in something they shouldn't have done. So what sort of, probably hard to put a percentage on it, but what would you have your gut feeling be is the amount of times that somebody has dabbled in, whether it's Ouija board or dabbled in something else? You know, how often does that become an issue for you?
If you're talking about our clients and not the other teams that go in ahead of us.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Not that large percentage any longer. And often they'll be, unfortunately, because of media, somebody will say, 25 years ago, my mother used a Ouija board. And yes, that's fine. That was 25 years ago. Nothing has happened to you since then. That has nothing to do with what's going on today. That's the reality. Do I think that a Ouija board in and of itself is evil? No. I think anytime you're trying to do spirit communication, you are opening yourself up. And if your energy is very negative, then you're going to attract something negative. That's something my grandmother taught me. Or you're going to manifest something negative. There's a difference. Manifestation is something you create through your own energy. It doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean it can't take on a life of its own, and it can be deadly, but it is created by you. Whereas attracting a spirit, they're going to be attracted to you for a reason. And if you're a disturbed person, you're going into places like haunted asylums or prisons. That's not the safest or healthiest place for you to be going. I don't care for the idea of paranormal tours, especially of places that have not been checked out and are not safe. That's very important.
And it's a massive market. I mean, certainly here in the UK, there's lots of groups that do that. I've been on them myself in the past as well, and work with a couple of those groups. But I think it is that thing of if you're not with the right group, people potentially playing at things, it's not setting you up great, especially if you're in that environment, asylums or anything like that. And I also, for my thoughts, worry sometimes about where people go and where their mental state is. If they're not in a good place themselves and they're going to hear potentially a lot of negativity of what you've said, then yes, you are going to become a beacon and attract yourself to different things. So I want to explore a little bit more about some of the stuff that you've been involved with, predominantly yourself. I know the temptation is to always talk about Ed and Lorraine, and I think absolutely plays for Ed and Lorraine. They're the first real investigators that I looked into and grew up with a little bit. Also tainted a little bit by the movies, and not grew up personally with them, but just from a side of that interest. I know the movies and books and everything around them sort of put forward something that isn't 100% factual, and we can pick up on both Ed and Lorraine as we go through this. But I'm just interested in cases that you may have been involved with them, or on your own with that around the UK, because that's obviously where I'm based. I have an interest all around the world, but UK is a thing, and we hear quite often about the cases in America, the big things. Yes, the Conjuring 2 was based on the Enfield case.
Loosely, very, very loosely.
Yeah, it was an interesting film to watch, and then interesting to do the research and the things to go into it. Extremely loosely is the case from that. But really, what I'd love to get to know is, those cases that may not be in the public eye and not as well known from the UK point of view, of cases that yourself and Ed and Lorraine have been involved with.
Sure. The first thing I want to point out, my grandfather and grandmother truly believed that they had a past lifetime in Scotland. When they went back to Scotland, they knew the places ahead of time, and they felt a visceral connection to the land. To them, they were coming home. So every single year they would come back to Great Britain. We would do a 3,000-mile tour over 3 weeks, investigating different haunted locations. Some of the places that I loved the most were places like Borley Rectory or Glamis Castle or Wistman's Wood, or just the Dartmoors, beautiful areas, haunted. And you were mentioning that Ed and Lorraine were the first people you had looked into, but they were not the first people who had been investigating things. As a matter of fact, one of the people that my grandfather looked up to tremendously was a man named Harry Price, who was famous for investigating Borley Rectory, which no longer exists, but the church is still there and still quite haunted. It was a famous poltergeist case. I know you've spoken of it, but for anybody who might be listening for the first time, it was a very famous poltergeist case. He investigated it in the 50s. He was a man who was actually friends with Harry Houdini, didn't have the best relationship with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, because he was far more skeptical than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was. But my grandfather didn't have real mentors in the field at all. And he really looked up to Harry Price. So his very first trip, he made sure he went to Borley, to the church. And as he walked into the church, he and my grandmother and the group they were with heard this ding, and a penny dropped from the rafters right at his feet. And it was the date of his birth. And my grandfather said, this was a gift from Harry Price.
Wow. Yeah.
I've been there myself. My grandmother was able to actually commune with the priest and the nun that haunt the churchyards. And she feels that they were lovers, unrequited love. And that's why they're still there. They're worried they're going to go to hell for what they had done. I don't believe that's possible. I don't think that God would do that, but that's what they believed, and that's their faith. So it's holding them back from passing over. I have some very interesting stories. One in particular blew my mind. We were in a pub in Devon, and we were having lunch. And my grandmother looked outside the window at the front where the road was, and she saw these Roman centurions or legionnaires marching by, but she could only see them from the chest up.
Right.
The rest of them was underground. And now, of course, she was astounded by this. She was like, why am I seeing this? And she mentioned it to the woman who owned the pub. And the woman said, oh, that makes perfect sense. The Roman road is about 5 feet below the current street out there. My grandmother was seeing a residual haunting from, 1700 years earlier. Just blew my mind. I mean, my grandmother was a superhero, honestly.
Have you heard of the Treasurer's House in York?
No, but we did spend quite a bit of time in York. It's probably one of the most haunted places in all of Europe.
Yeah. But the Treasurer's House was very similar. That there was a report that I think it was a workman. I want to say a plumber, it may not be. He was doing some work underneath in the cellars, and he saw what he described as Roman centurions marching. And memory might fail me a little bit on this, but I think he said that he could only see them from the knee above. And again, when they've looked into that, the actual old Roman road was set below that. And that's quite a famous one from York. And York is very, very haunted. But that was a very similar one of that thing of knee above because of the level of the thing. But I mean, amazing that to be sitting there having your lunch and looking out and seeing that walking past. I mean, that must have just been an amazing experience to be around.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. What is it? Clifford Tower in York?
In York, yeah.
That was the first time I practiced psychometry, and it was at my grandparents' request. I had no idea what this was. It was just a tower up on a little mound. I thought it was cool. And my grandfather told me to touch it and tell me what I could feel. And I could smell smoke. I could feel heat. There was terror and fire, and I had no idea why I was saying these things or feeling these things at the time. And then my grandparents told me about how a rumor had gotten started and Jews were being accused of killing the king. And the Jewish population was being killed by mobs. Many of them had escaped to Clifford Tower, which was a royal tower, and they had expected to be saved, but no help ever came. And the mob set the tower on fire. Those that escaped the tower were killed as well, but that was what I was picking up on.
It's an interesting that, because I did an investigation at Clifford Tower probably 20 years ago now, show my age now, and we were invited by English Heritage, who own and managed the site, and I think there was a photographer who'd done a book launch. He was very famed for how he framed his photographs to look very haunted type thing, not actually having anything in the picture, but just a haunting type of picture, photograph. And I had a sort of experience there where and it's the first time this has ever happened to me. It's only happened probably 3 times since, where I was at the top of the tower and felt like there was fire, there was smoke, there was screaming, and that was the first time it had happened to me. And it was like, and then it was afterwards when we found out a bit more about that, and that story you just said there is exactly what they repeated to us. So very interesting that you had that feeling, and I've also had a very similar experience, actually inside the tower itself.
I think it's very important for anybody who wants to try to use their psychic abilities. They cannot know anything about a location before they go there. Otherwise, you can't trust anything you're feeling. You have to go in blind. And I have found that that's the only time I'm accurate.
It's that thing about suggestiveness of you going in and you're understanding something, then, and it's always difficult, that subjectiveness of if you do know about that beforehand, is it you picking up on that, and if you've already got that pre-warning about what's going to be there, it's that thing of saying, well, you already knew that. And there was a famous case in the UK, don't know if you ever heard of the program Most Haunted. I think it did come to America at some point, but they had a psychic medium on there, Derek Okora, and a lot of people believe Derek was quite gifted. A lot of people think that he wasn't, and they set him up on that program where they give him some information beforehand about a venue. I also think that they'd written something down, and then actually in one of the episodes they go through this and publicly out him, because he did repeat that story. But there was many people who believed absolutely that he had that gift, but that really did damage his reputation from there of the way it was set up. And don't 100% agree with the way that they've done it. If you've got an issue with somebody, deal with it rather than putting it out to air where everybody gets it. But it's about ratings at the end of the day, isn't it? So I guess that was going to get more ratings for them.
There's this weird, for anybody who's following the paranormal community, there's so much petty infighting. It is reprehensible. I do not associate with people in the paranormal community. I don't know who they are. I don't know their names. I don't care to. I can name like 3 people. And that's only because they've had something to do, some interaction with my family. Otherwise, I don't want to know, because I see this stuff online and it's just embarrassing. I'm trying to help people. I don't want to be involved with that kind of drama.
Yeah. So just going back, I know I interrupted you there when you were talking about things, but picking back up on locations in the UK. I mean, for you, was there and I guess for your grandparents as well, I know you mentioned the affinity with Scotland and everything, but Was there a location in the UK that you absolutely loved, or maybe not loved is not the right word, but for paranormal that really?
Honestly, I haven't done enough investigations. I mean, I can tell you stories of investigations, but nothing really came of them. As you know, most of the time when you go into a place, you're not going to see a lot. It can be a very boring, long night, sitting in cold cemeteries waiting for something to happen. Or, like, for instance, one place I absolutely find haunting and beautiful is Wistman's Wood. It's a prehistoric forest in Devon, and I just think it's unbelievably beautiful. Or the Dartmoors. I fell in love with them, which is why I brought them up twice here. But I haven't had any paranormal experiences in either place. I I wish I could remember the names of particular graveyards that I've visited. There's one outside of Grimsby that's famous. My grandfather convinced me and my partner to spend the night there in May. It was so cold, and he laughed his butt off the next morning because there was nothing going on there. He just wanted us to spend the night out in a graveyard. He was a joker. But I'm trying to think. I mean, yes, I've had cases, horrifying cases, but not where I was on site, where I've had to work remotely. So there was one in the Orkney Isles. That was bad. That was really bad. I don't think I've ever spoken of this publicly. First, this poor woman and her partner and her kids moved into this house. She had been escaping a former lover in the IRA, and they had been put there as a safe place. They're no longer there, so I can safely talk about it. And she had been raped and abused and paranormally abused throughout her life. But when they moved into this home, this, oh shucks, what do you call it when it's public housing?
Sort of, I think we've done it as social housing or housing associate council housing.
Council housing, thank you. That's the one I was trying to think of. It was a council house out in the middle of nowhere. And immediately poltergeist activity started happening. The typical toys without batteries starting by themselves or moving across the room. A ghostly demonic dog appearing in the hallway. Children being terrified. There were the flickering lights, of course. Trying to remember what else. The woman was being touched in a very sexual way. And she called in a man who immediately, he claimed to be a bishop. I don't like these online bishops and so forth, that they get their title from signing up for it online. It just doesn't make sense. You know, if you're going to call yourself a priest, go to seminary, become a priest. But he went in, he did his investigation, and then he immediately exposed her online and in a newspaper or magazine article, excuse me. Then she called me and our team, and try as we may, this was during lockdown, we could not get to the Orkney Isles. I was living in Scotland, in Dunfermline, and I couldn't get there. And it just got worse and worse. Her partner ended up leaving. Her children started getting so bad that the eldest moved out, and the two youngest were being terrorized. There was this masculine figure that was appearing to the 3 or 4 year old And the 7-year-old also was reporting seeing it. It was talking to the children. It was, if I recall correctly, and forgive me, but I've had 10,000 cases. Some of them stick out of my head better than others. I believe that one of the small child was slapped so hard it left a mark on her face. We did get the house cleansed. We were working hard getting this woman the psychological support she needed so that she'd be spiritually stronger. She did end up, unfortunately, getting kidnapped by some man that she met who locked her in the trunk of his car, abused her, and she ended up institutionalized for a while, but she appears to be doing much better now. The paranormal can be an incredibly messy situation where you're trying to figure out what's really going on, how to fix it, and how much of it is paranormal. Because there's a tendency, as soon as you believe you're dealing with the paranormal, everything is going to be labeled paranormal. And 9 times out of 10, those things are not going to be paranormal. The heater breaks down in your house, or the water heater, or the faucets turn on by themselves. Okay, some of that might be paranormal, but other parts are just coincidence. But because you're putting so much energy into it, you're now manifesting it and giving it more strength to do even more harm. So I try to warn people about that, to not jump to conclusions. Look for the natural explanation first.
Yeah, I think that's a really harrowing case that you've been involved with there, and that's the case sometimes where paranormal can be going on, but I think what can happen in that real life, the real world, can be just as bad, and feed into that. So I hope she's moved on and she's doing a lot better with that. But it's a good example there of the fact that it's not quite as straightforward as people think it might be in relation to I always find with movies, not all of them, but the Hollywood blockbusters, and The Conjuring was part of that, where it always seems to end happily at the end, and it's always a happy story. And you know that the actual reality of that isn't everybody. I think previously when we spoke about, I think it's Conjuring 2, I think, where it shows that your grandfather playing the guitar and singing.
Yeah, that never.
Within that wasn't quite necessarily what happened in real life with it, but so it's always difficult, isn't it, where people think there's always a happy ending. And unfortunately, that's not always the case.
That's true. People die. The paranormal, ultimately, I think it's very empowering, but it can also be deadly. It's like electricity. It can light the world, but it can also kill you. You have to know how to work with it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And just looking back, I mean, you mentioned obviously the cemetery outside of Grimsby, and grandfather having a bit of laugh with you after the event from that. But when was the first time that you, I guess, got involved with the paranormal? I'm guessing it was probably with your grandparents. But what was the earliest case that you ever did become involved with?
Well, let's start even before my first case. I was locked in the museum when I was 3 or 4 years old, and it was only momentarily. My grandfather happily was in his office in the back and came running and rescued me, but it scared the crap out of me and left an impression. When I was 14, I was on a lecture tour with my grandparents. Among the highlights of that tour, one of the 3 exorcists from the case where the Exorcist movie is based on.
Yeah.
He came up after the lecture and introduced himself, and he was just the sweetest, humblest man. And it taught me something important about having humility when you're dealing with this work. But we were doing, well, they were, excuse me, I wasn't being interviewed. They were being interviewed for one of these evening news magazines, tabloid news magazines. I think we were in Ohio. And after 2 hours of interviews in the hotel, they took us to this house we had never been to. And there was a local reporter with us, and he had been preparing a news story. And he had all his notes. He hadn't written the story yet, but he had all of his notes from interviewing the family and all of the horrible things that were going on there. We were not allowed in the house. And my grandmother stood out front with the cameras rolling, and she's talking about this bloody apparition of this big fat guy with a bloody apron and a cleaver walking into the kitchen, the smell of rotting meat, all sorts of amazing details. While the local reporter he's so astounded, he's showing me his notes. And he's like, look, it's like, wow. And I thought, my God, my grandmother's amazing. She really nailed it. And she would have been the first one to tell you, a psychic is only, the best psychic is only right 60% of the time. Mm. That is not a percentage you want to bet your life on.
Yeah.
No, you don't change the course of your life because you went to get a reading, ever. You know, look for the proof. And unfortunately, then you've also got the bias of trying to prove they're right or wrong, and that's the wrong way to go about it as well. But my grandmother, when she was right, she was amazing. My first case, on the other hand, I was 16 years old. I was still afraid of the dark. And I've talked about this a million times, but my grandfather, it was just my grandfather and I and another man named Paul Bartz. It was August. I was just about to start my last year of high school, and my grandfather invited me on a case. So we went up to Massachusetts to this little row home, and the husband and wife were sitting outside. They would not go in the house without us. As soon as we got inside, I knew why. There was the sound of pounding, like giant fists pounding the walls in repetitions of 3. And my grandfather immediately said, that's a sign of the devil. The number 3 is an insult to the Trinity. I don't agree any longer. That manifestation, yes, it was meant to terrify. But if you're in a different culture, you'd have a totally different manifestation. Wouldn't be by the number 3. As we're walking up the stairs to the bedrooms and the bathroom, the walls are literally shaking, and I could hear clawing and growling. We get to the top of the stairs, and I look into the bathroom to my left, and on the wall, there's this giant crucifix, and just like straight out of Hollywood, it's upside down. Oh, crap.
Is that right in front of your eyes?
No, it was already upside
already, down.
Right. And my grandfather tells me to sit in the master bedroom and wait for something to happen while they're downstairs using Holy Church incense to try to make this thing reveal itself. I'm like, you want it to reveal itself more? I mean, the house is literally shaking. What do you need? So I sat there in the dark for an hour listening to all of this while they smudged downstairs. And every time they tried to bring this pot full of incense upstairs, it would go out, which is really weird. We were doing an overnight radio show that night on WTIC AM radio 1060 with Brian Dow. And the man that was with us, Paul Bartz, and the husband were upstairs in one of the girls' bedrooms on a phone. The lady of the house and my grandfather were off to my left on the couch in the living room, and I was in a recliner holding that same crucifix because I had nothing else to protect me. I mean, I really went in there not knowing anything. And I had a phone in my other hand so I could listen to what was going on. And under my breath, I'm saying, by the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. By the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. And at 3 a.m., these two hulking black shapes came down the stairs and stood on the landing looking at us. It was pitch black, and we could still see them. And the woman screamed that her face was on fire. And my grandfather shone the flashlight on her face, and we watched 3 claw marks appear on the left side of her face and blood drip onto her chest. And then at 3:15, the pot with the Holy Church incense in it flew out of the kitchen and straight at my head. Just missed me. It hit the window right behind me. The shade flew up. The pot crumpled, and the window didn't break. I said an expletive over the radio. Not proud of it, but the woman started screaming she wanted out of the house. And I thought this was a very good idea. I'm going to help her get out of the house. And the lights are starting to go on and off. And these 2 hulking black shapes are still there by the front door. I run to the front door we'd been in and out of, and it wouldn't open. And then the recliner I had been sitting in tumbles across the room at me. And then the door opened it by itself, and she and I escaped, leaving my grandfather sitting there on the phone, calmly telling people what was going on around us. It was the bravest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. He fought in World War II when he was 17 years old. I guess, he had his baptism by fire, and that was mine. The funny thing is, the next night, I went home, and for the first time in my childhood, I went to bed without the light on. I was no longer afraid. I'd lived through it. I had no reason to be afraid anymore.
That certainly is a baptism of fire. You say to going into that. That's the first case that you go into, and you're on to that. I think 16 is what you said, and
yeah,
I was going back to. I think I was a bit older than that on the first case, and it was definitely not as much going on as that. Obviously that didn't put you off. You've then had a lot of years. I didn't want to say too many years in there, but a lot of years then of being in there. Yeah, 44. That's just unreal. A lot of people would say that you spent this amount of time in the paranormal world. You spent a lot of time around that with your grandparents and in growing up. But you've got the foundation that you're still involved with. It's still very active from there. And you started off with that case that you just explained there. What made you decide to carry on with this and not take the don't take this the wrong way, but that almost retirement age coming up potentially there, and take an easy life and retire and enjoy the rest of your life? What's made you continue?
There's a need. I don't do this because I'm fascinated by the paranormal. I don't even consider it paranormal. It's normal. Just because we don't understand something, we shouldn't label it as something outside of reality. I know the phenomena is real. I've experienced it throughout my life. I just don't accept the superstitious explanations for it all. I think there's a need for clear-headed compassion in this field. And that's why I continue. And my grandmother, she probably continued until she was about 72. When my grandfather collapsed, she spent the rest of his life taking care of him. And yes, she did some lectures here and there to keep herself alive. But really, she didn't do any more investigating. That was something we did instead. I do this because of the crazy crap I see on television and in the media and social media. And people are living in fear of things they don't understand when they don't necessarily have to. I grew up with fear. I consider it my mission in life to help people overcome fear. And education is part of that. Which is, why I'm writing a book. It's why I give these online presentations. I feel it's important to empower people. Yes, I will tell ghost stories, but I use the ghost stories as a vehicle to educate people, not just to titillate.
Mm. So you mentioned the book. Is it a autobiography about your life, or is it a more general? What's
No, it's not a biography. I am using these experiences I've had, these many different experiences around the world, including some of the more famous ones that everybody's heard of, but never really got the true story of.
Yeah.
But I'm using those to start opening doors to bigger questions about the nature of reality. What is the meaning of life? How do we shape our own local realities? What power do we really have? I want to answer the big questions, and or at least raise the questions that need to be asked. I don't claim to know everything, but I have taken my grandparents' work and I've gone farther because I had them. You know, this is not a religion, it's a field of study. And you can look at my grandparents' books, you can look at their old videos. All you're seeing there is a snapshot in time.
Mm.
And in some cases, especially when you're looking at those old books, you're looking at another author's interpretation of what my grandparents were trying to get across. Some were great, some are not. Some are garbage, to be quite honest. And you can't use those to educate yourself. You really can't. Would you want to study medicine from a 1970s textbook, or would you want to study it from what you've got today?
Yeah.
You know, it's the same idea.
Yeah. I think there is massive differences between, when Ed and Lorraine were at their peak, if you like, for what they're doing to it now. I think technology is available. Everyone can have their own different views on which technologies work and which app for your phone works. And my personal view is they all have a place somewhere to whether you would I 100% believe in something an app was telling me. No, I wouldn't. I'd want to look at more evidence that comes from that. And to me, if I can see the evidence, I can hear it, I can feel it, then that's different to an app telling me that there's a word being generated. Fine, but it's what else can go with that. But absolutely, I think with its different times, and I have read many of the books that were about there and read them, and I take them for what they are. Is a good ghost story in some cases. There'll be an element of what happened within there, and you tease some of them out. But you're right, you can't take that as a studial book that you will get all of these brilliant insights of how to conduct investigation, how they potentially conducted the investigation. To me, it's the story about the whole thing. And whichever way we look at it, books and movies need to be a certain way so they can sell and get the interest. Recently just been doing some stuff around the Amityville. Now, obviously, it's well known that the film, the book, the film, and everything else is vastly different with what's in there. And it's one of the things where there's still debate now of what was true, what was not true. And, that's not for us to get into today, because that's one of the big things that go back.
Well, I will just say one thing about that. My grandparents were invited in there by Channel 5 News out of New York. They only spent one day there. And my grandmother said it was as close to hell as she ever hoped to get. All of the photos you see online were taken by news photographers, not by my grandparents. So any evidence that's there was gathered by actual credible sources. That's all I have to say about Amityville right now. As for apps, I don't trust them. I'm old school. I'm like my grandfather in that way. You cannot download an EMF reader to your phone. That's not the way phones work. But if a spirit wants to communicate with you, electrical or energy manipulation is the simplest thing they can do, because they are energy. So they do have their place, but always use them with skepticism. The truth is, perception creates reality. We When we are faced with the unknown, that cognitive dissonance is something that our brain cannot handle, and we will give it a face, even if that face is the devil.
Yeah, very, very much great point. We talked about the first case that you were involved with. And again, probably a question that you get asked loads of times, but I think it really is an interesting question and a very useful, relevant question. But can you talk about the case that was that one that had a real profound effect on your life, how it may change perspective? I know you're saying that your perspective is a bit different, perhaps than some of the things that your grandfather had said. You know, we've already said you don't believe in the devil and different stuff like that. But was there that one case that sort of changed that for you and put you on that trajectory?
Absolutely. Maurice Theriault. That's a character known as Frenchie in the movies, the Nun movies, which, by the way, are not real. Great picture you have behind you there, but that's a creation of James Wan. It doesn't exist in any of my grandparents' case files. But Maurice was a real man. He was an illiterate French-Canadian farmer living in Warren, Massachusetts with his wife, Nancy. And he had been horrifyingly abused by his father, who was a monster. One day, his father called him and he said, "Maurice, I just want you to know I love you." First time he'd ever said that to Maurice. And then he set down the phone, and while Maurice listened, his father walked into the next room, picked up a rifle, killed Maurice's mother, and then killed himself. There was a whole bunch of activity going on. My grandfather and grandmother and I, as well as my partner Ray Jefferson, went out to the house to interview them. At which point my grandfather felt that the father is probably the problem. Why don't we go to the graveyard? You can tell your father you forgive him, that you love him, and you just want him to rest in peace. And Maurice was standing there crying his eyes out. And I watched him get punched under the jaw. We all heard the pow. His head rocked back and he flew backwards at least 3 meters, flat on his back. That's when my grandfather decided that Ray and I were going to be staying in that house quite a bit to gather evidence. The day of the exorcism, now we had watched Maurice coming under possession. I had to deal with it myself, where after he came out of the possession, he had been complaining that his back was bothering him. When I pulled up his shirt, on his white t-shirt, there were 3 bloody red crosses. And I lifted up his t-shirt and there was blood on his back, but there were no cuts this time. Normally, something would cut into his skin. Not that time. I asked him for the t-shirt. So we went back to the house. He hands me the t-shirt and it's white. There's no blood on it at all. I was going to bring it to the University of Connecticut to get it tested. Nothing. There's still blood on his back, but nothing on the shirt. The day of the exorcism with Bishop McKenna, I was there protecting the bishop. 3 other men, including Ray, were behind Maurice. Maurice is rocking back and forth. His stomach is killing him. That's where I believe the spirit enters. And he's drooling blood down his white t-shirt again. His eyes look like snake eyes. And I can hear my grandfather complaining he doesn't feel well. And my grandmother, again, one of the greatest psychics ever, but she was wrong. She looked right at him and she said, "Ed, why don't you have a banana? You're probably low on potassium." She couldn't see he was having a massive heart attack right then. Which is why I don't trust psychics without evidence, including myself. After that exorcism, Maurice was fine for 2 years. But remember what I said. He had been horribly abused. He suffered from PTSD and massive trauma. We didn't yet understand the need for psychological help to follow up or beforehand. And if you don't deal with those underlying issues, the door can be reopened. 2 years later, I was in Africa in the Peace Corps, and my grandparents got a phone call from his wife, Nancy. He's coming under possession again. I can't deal with it this time. I'm getting a restraining order. He's out of the house. One night, she's coming home from work. She's getting out of her car, and he's hiding, waiting for her with a shotgun. He blew her arm off, dragged her bleeding into the kitchen, sat her at the kitchen table, and she was sure this is it. She's going to die just like Maurice's mother. And at the last moment, he appeared to be struggling with himself. And he put the shotgun under his chin and blew his head off. That, even though my grandfather did not like the idea of psychology being involved with paranormal, and I understand it was a reaction to parapsychologists in the 1970s and my grandfather's own religious beliefs. He felt that they were taking God out of it and that was incorrect. But I learned, and I was already studying psychology, I learned the necessity of dealing with cases holistically. You have to deal with the whole person, not just with the phenomena. Otherwise, ultimately, you're probably going to fail.
I mean, that case in itself, I mean, it's so sad, what he was battling against in many ways, say, from what he'd suffered from his father and gone through that, but also having that possession side of it as well. And I just think that battle at the end, I can see why they had that effect of that internal battle of not wanting whatever that was to do what it was going to do. And I guess part of that was to kill her. So
I think it was his father. I think my grandfather was correct when he said it was his father. Granted, they didn't believe that later. They believed it was demonic, that no human being could do that. But I've since learned that, yes, human beings can take over human beings.
I think it sort of leads in a good place from there is that, people potentially are struggling. And as we said right at the top there about the foundation and how you're there to help people, but people are struggling. What advice would you give to someone who has got some unexplained things that are starting to happen to them? So maybe some frightening activity that's there. What would be the first bit of advice you would give to people of how to deal with it?
Oh, the very first, don't jump to conclusions. Do not immediately assume you're dealing with the devil or a demon. Just because you hear footsteps in your hallway at night or even knocking on the bedroom door, don't assume it's evil. Why would you assume that? Has something bad happened? Look at the consequences of the phenomena. Okay, so your iPad flew across the room. Yeah, that sucks. It smashed against the wall. But if a human spirit's trying to get your attention, if they are so desperate to get your attention, that explosion of energy necessary to move something physically, they don't have fine motor control for that. They are going to make a mess. But it's because they're so desperate. Look at it that way first. Don't jump to the conclusion that it's something necessarily evil. And always rule out the natural explanation first. The next thing I would suggest, if you're actually dealing with something paranormal, look at your current living situation. How can you improve it? Clean the house, get rid of any clutter, let the energy flow freely. Play games together, fill the home with love, not anger, not fighting. Leave that outside. Work on yourselves. Watch comedies that make you laugh out loud. Listen to music that makes you want to dance and sing. Not Norwegian death metal, please. That's probably not the best choice, even if it does make you happy. You want to pump the house full of positive energy because it sucks the life out of any negative manifestations. So those would be my first bits of advice.
I was watching an interview that Ed had done. I think it was around Amityville. No, I want to talk about that, but I think within that he was saying that where that negative energy likes to hide is in a place of darkness. Where it is that, because that's where it feels more comfortable, it's where it thrives. And if you can remove that darkness, I guess is what we're saying there, through filling it with that positivity and, you know, the music, it's a better choice of music than the heavy metal bit within there. But, you know, it's that type of thing of, you know, removing the places that it potentially has to grow in, manifest its strength within that by trying to put some light and happiness into that.
Yeah. My grandfather obviously was looking at this through a very Catholic lens.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't. I've learned that these things manifest all over the world according to our cultural and spiritual beliefs. And if you're looking at this through the lens of one religion, you're not actually seeing reality. Religion could be a wonderful tool for dealing with the paranormal because it's a way of focusing your faith and your intention through ritual. And any religion will work as long as you believe in it. So that tells me more about our strength and our connection to God and how we connect versus the actual path you happen to be on. There's a wonderful Hindu proverb I love. There are many paths up the mountain. It's only the fool running around the bottom saying you're going the wrong way who never gets any closer to the top.
No, that's a really good one. I have to try to write that down to remember that from that. But I think your experience, you said you've lived, you know, around the world in the different places, and predominantly from whether it's Catholic or Christian religion, a lot of the beliefs are based upon that. And you talked about your grandfather was from a Catholic persuasion from theirs. And you've talked about, you know, different parts of the world that still have paranormal activity happening, different things happening, but obviously more attuned to their religion. What with all the different places you've lived in, I guess, how does that come across? How does it differ from religion to religion about how potentially things may manifest?
Well, you know, it's funny. When I first came down here to South America, they asked me, why is it that the United States and Europe have over-the-top hauntings where things are flying around and going crazy, and we don't have that here for the most part? And I had to think about that for a while. And part of it, I believe, is because in South America, in Asia, and Africa, they still have a strong belief in magic. Now, I am a skeptic by nature, and I find the idea of magic to be intellectually insulting. To me, I can only define it as energy and quantum physics. But it's effective. I've had to deal with it myself. And I think that in these other cultures that I'm living in, they're directing the energy in a focused manner. Whereas places like England or the United States, there is no focus. So when you manifest something, there are no guidelines for how it's going to manifest. And it grows out of control with your fear and can be devastating, like that first poltergeist case I worked on. So I think that's the explanation. I have seen, for instance, here in South America and in other countries throughout the world, there's a religion known as Umbanda, and then there's Candomblé and others, Voodoo, where they invite spirits to possess them and to use their bodies, but it's a voluntary thing. And then afterward, the people are perfectly fine. There is no repercussions that are negative for them. That says something to me about those manifestations. And I'm fascinated by learning about different exorcism rites. Now, possession is incredibly rare when it's uncontrolled and uninvited. Incredibly rare. In my life, I've only dealt with 12 possession cases out of 44 years. So people who tell you, oh, I did 300 exorcisms last year. No, you didn't. You might have done 300 deliverances if you believe that, alcoholism and porn addiction are caused by demons. That is not an exorcism. But those would be just simple examples of how they manifest differently. You're never going to get Beelzebub in a Hindu family. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And just thinking there, I can't recall the names for now, but there is a number of priests, bishops from America. I'm sure there will be from other parts, but America that do interviews where they talk about all the exorcisms they've done, possession with levitation and everything like that. I know you talked about sort of small number there, 12 of that sort of possession, but have you witnessed levitation? Obviously not to the extent of head spinning around like in the Exorcist film, but have you experienced any of that?
I've been levitated twice.
Right.
Yeah. In the Smurl case, which is the most recent Conjuring film, I was going up the stairs. There was a young man with me. I was in college at the time, and I brought a friend because I had no way to drive to Pennsylvania. And Mrs. Smurl, the two of them were at the top of the stairs. When I got to the top of the stairs, I started swaying, and all of a sudden I'm levitating over the stairs. And if they hadn't grabbed me, I would have fallen down the stairs. So that was the first time. Another time I was in a case that we had successfully taken care of, a poltergeist case in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. And 2 years afterward, I was still working with the family. We were putting together a support group for families who were going through this kind of phenomena. And the lady of the house invited me and my cousin to spend the night. He had never been in the house. He didn't believe that any of this was happening. And so the 10-year-old had to give up his bed. He is sleeping on the floor in a sleeping bag. We're in our sleeping bags on the bed. And all of a sudden, the bed picked up, flew across the room, smashed down, and broke into pieces. My cousin got out of there like the Roadrunner. I mean, leaving smoke rings. And I'm laughing my butt off because I thought it was the most incredible thing I'd just experienced. But I believe that it was the 10-year-old who was upset that we had been using his bed and he had to be stuck on the floor. That energy was still there. And I think he somehow subconsciously tapped into it. Nothing ever happened again. Once in 2 years, and then never again for decades afterward were there any manifestations. So that, to me, shows we're not dealing with something spiritual in that case.
Mm. You can imagine that, being in bed in it, lifting up and flying across the room. I can imagine your cousin was straight out there. But, it's one of the things, isn't it? It never happened to me, but you think, well, I'd love it to happen, but how would you react to it when it happens? Would be a bit different. I
did love it. I mean, it was amazing. Oh, there was another levitation. I forgot. Again, with my cousin, actually. We were in Newtown, Connecticut, and this husband and wife, she was very pregnant, like 8.5 months pregnant. And he was coming under possession, supposedly. So we decided to spend the night. My cousin was sleeping closest to the door, and we were across the hall from the couple. All of a sudden, 2:00 in the morning, I think, about that time, she starts screaming. And my cousin panics and he's grabbing me. She's screaming, grabbing me. And I'm like, I know, get off me. And I throw him on the floor and I run across the hallway. And her husband was levitated over her very pregnant body under possession. Now, back then, you know, I was what, 24, 20, yeah, 24. I ran and I jumped and I tackled him in midair. We tumbled off the other side of the bed and I ended up on top of him. And then my cousin came in with holy water and he's throwing it while I'm screaming, by the power of Jesus Christ, like a man to be gone. And he did come out of it. But if anybody ever looks at those old photos of the museum, there's a famous one of this demonic looking statue with big horns. That was found behind the house in the woods by a hunter, local hunter. And it was with a makeshift altar on a stone with blood and candle resin, you know, melted wax on the stone. And it was obvious this was being used for some kind of worship. And we figured out there were Satanists involved here, and they were probably doing something that was causing trouble for the family. There was actually a funeral home right next door to this, and we think they were using necromantic energy for their rituals. But that that large statue, about 7 feet tall, is in the museum still.
Yeah. On the museum, I know you don't have anything to do with it, but was it always the intention of your grandparents for it to be a museum that people would be able to visit, or was it somewhere to hide, not hide away, to remove these objects from the public?
Exactly. It was there to remove things from the public. It's a prison. I wish my grandparents had never called it a museum. My grandfather, he had a bit of a showman side to him. And yes, they would invite people in on occasion with the understanding, don't touch anything. What people are doing today with the museum disgusts me. Bringing things on tour and saying my grandparents would have approved of that. Never. My grandmother has approached several people since her passing, including me several times and other mediums. And she's made it quite clear she's very unhappy with this.
Yeah. I mean, comforting to know that she's still around and being able to contact people.
She's helped me on cases. She's even saved my.
Yeah. I mean, you say that. I mean, I think previously when we spoke, I think you have had quite close brushes with potential death. Is there anything you can share with us around that sort of the worst side of things that may have happened?
Oh, sure. I mean, besides what I've already shared with you, I was working on a case in Philadelphia, and the night before I was supposed to go for the first time, no, I take that back. For 3 nights before I was supposed to go there for the first time, gas turned on my stove overnight without the flame and filled the whole house with the smell of gas. That was meant to intimidate me, to keep me from going there. It didn't, of course. Other times, we'd get in the car to go to a case, it wouldn't start. Or one time, actually was in Philadelphia as well. I had just broken a generational curse on a family, and the spirits were not happy. As soon as we got right to the highway, we were just about to get on it, we were speeding up, and the brakes went out. And we had to stop suddenly, and we couldn't. We smashed right into a car in front of us. Then the brakes were fine, and we drove home. I got messed up knees from it, but that was another time. There was a time Satanists chased me all over trying to catch me, and I luckily knew the town really well and was able to escape them. But they didn't like me investigating a house. Let me see what else. I mean, there are plenty of times they've tried to intimidate, but to me, that proves I'm not dealing with something terribly intelligent.
Right.
Because there's a limited intelligence. There's a reactive nature to these things, not active. And they will try the same tactics over and over and over again throughout the years, regardless of the fact that they've never worked. Why would they do that if these things really were fallen angels with the wisdom of the ages? That doesn't make sense to me as an explanation. If I were a fallen angel with that kind of power, I'd be taking over somebody like Trump and pressing the button if I want to wipe out the world, or at least starting several wars that, wipe out half the population so that we all work for our worst natures. I mean, if you're going to believe in that kind of thing, then take it to its logical conclusion. Why are we attacking? Why are they manifesting in homes that already have lots of problems? And they're the most vulnerable among us, not the most powerful.
Yeah. Again, really good point. It's just looking for those that are maybe starting out in the paranormal or thinking they want to get involved with that. They may have a calling from it to whatever reason why they want to get into it. What advice would you give to them, and what important lessons do you think that they need to consider before they become involved?
Learn first. I don't like the idea of paranormal unity. The idea of, oh, for instance, you want to practice surgery? Fine, I support you. Here's your scalpel. No, go learn. Learn psychology, learn quantum physics, learn theology. But learn theology not as a believer. Learn it as a scholar. There's a difference. As I said earlier, you can use religion as a tool, but it isn't the way you examine the paranormal. Get involved with people that you have thoroughly researched and made sure they are reputable. You do not want to get involved with 90% of the people out there because they're not in it for the right reasons, or they've learned from watching Ghost Adventures or some other ridiculous program. None of those supposed reality shows are real, and nobody should ever think of them as a learning tool. They aren't. And go in with humility, for God's sake. Do not use religious provocation ever, under any circumstances. That's not for you. I don't do it. And on the rarest of occasions, I might have done it, 2 or 3 times maybe. You don't have to. Go in there with respect. Try to figure out who you're dealing with, not what you're dealing with. Half your job is diagnosing the issue. That's the truth. Don't jump to conclusions. Take your time, really examine it.
That's some really good advice. Mentioned there about sort of learning reality shows. There was a show that came forward that was based or allegedly based on this thought process, maybe just from Ed as opposed to Ed and Lorraine, about 28 Days Haunted. What's your view on that?
They never had that theory. That's some producer came up with that idea and sold it. These people are just trying to profit off of my grandparents, and it's pretty disgusting, to be quite honest. And these are people attached to my family. I don't take pride in saying these negative things, but they're hawking alcohol that they store around Annabelle and then saying, make sure you get blessed before you drink it. Like, what? My grandfather is rolling over in his grave with this kind of crap going on. This is not what they stood for.
Just on that, I've sort of probably gone through the bits that I wanted to cover. Is there anything else that you want to draw out today that we haven't covered as yet?
Just again, please do not jump to the conclusion that what you're dealing with is necessarily bad or evil. Go and truly look at this clearly. And don't just assume it's paranormal. Just because you hear knocking in the walls, it could be the pipes or any number of other good excuses. Also, here's another one. People often will say, my dog's looking at something, my cat's staring at something. There's something known as emotional contagion. If you're anxious, if you're feeling upset about something, that animal is also going to get upset, and they're going to be looking for something, anything that might be causing that anxiety in you. And also remember that they have much better natural senses than we do. There could be ants in the wall crawling around. You don't know that. Termites making noise and they're staring right at it. Okay. Don't take that as your proof that we're dealing with the paranormal.
That's great. And I'd say, Chris, really appreciate the time that you've given for this. Really respect what you're doing in relation to continuing the legacy in the right way, as I see it from there, in wanting to help people, which I'm sure is what your grandparents always set out to do, to do the best for people and to help people. So great to do that. Put the links in for where everyone can get in touch with that, where it's got that. But just thanks very much for taking the time. I know you haven't been well over the last few days, so thanks for muddling through with that. But really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it as well. And again, anybody who needs help, you can reach out to me. I'm here to listen.